listening to Winnipeg's Classic 107. My name is Simon Rusnak. A new year provides the opportunity for resolutions and change, though too much of the latter can often prove to be more bad than good. Thankfully, we haven't changed from our long-standing First Friday tradition of welcoming Chris Hall of McNally Robinson Booksellers into the studio. Happy New Year, Chris.
Happy New Year, Simon.
So wonderful to see. Hopefully it was a restful and rejuvenating holiday season for you. And I feel like I ask you every year about resolutions for the new year. So instead, let me ask you, have you done any reflecting on 2023 now that it's in the rearview mirror?
Reflecting. Well, I'm a reflective person, so I think I'm always reflecting. So I don't need to change that way. Reflecting on last year for the store, we sold a lot of books last year. Holy smokes. It was thrilling how many people came to visit us and over the year, but especially over the fall, how many people were obviously getting books for Christmas. And my theory is that when those lockdowns, when we had all that time, a lot of us rediscovered or we discovered books, and we like the moments or the time we get. It's just so relaxing, and it shuts everything else off. And I think people aren't willing to give that up. So we're really seeing a resurgence in the interest in books. I'm
so glad to hear it, especially since the other reason why I didn't ask about your 2024 resolution is that I know it's to become Bookseller of the World. We've talked about this enough.
Every year.
It sounds like you're well on the way there, Chris. And I mean, like you say, a wonderful time at McNally and just sort of building on that momentum into the new year. So let's jump right into it. The very first recommendation of 2024 is what?
It's a novel called Cold. Suitable.
Yeah, feels right.
That's right. It's by an author who's fairly recognizable, Drew Hayden Taylor, and his name's been around for a while. He's one of the early success stories for Indigenous authors in Canada. A novel called Motorcycles and Sweetgrass. It was big at the time, and we've carried it continuously since 2010, and that's pretty remarkable for a book. He's known for the humor in his writing, and the newest novel will serve well to beat the winter blues. It's a bit of a thriller, part murder mystery, part horror novel, but with plenty of that humor. 4 characters, Indigenous professor, a hockey player in the IHL, the Indigenous Hockey League, a detective, and a journalist turned author. And they're only slightly connected until they realize that someone or something is hunting them all. It's a real mashup of a novel, lots going on, lots of energy, really enjoyable even when what's happening maybe isn't quite so enjoyable.
Yeah, I mean, it sounds like building on a lot of tropes there, right? I mean, the idea of a thriller, of a horror, that sort of detective novel element, and then, like you say, a little bit of humor. Also important to note that Drew Hayden Taylor is the McNally Author of the Month for January.
Right. We're honoring him,
And then we'll make a belated appearance in early February at an event.
Apparently he got so excited to be named our Author of the Month, he wanted to come, so which is great. We're starting to see more of that.
Oh, I'm just so glad to hear it. All right, the next pick is Martyr, and I need to say that emphatically.
It's true, because it's Martyr with exclamation point. You're right. So it's by an author, new to me, an author called named Kaveh Akbar, and I'm struggling to find the best way to describe this novel. The cover copy calls it wholly original and a brand new contemporary voice in fiction. And those are phrases that kind of automatically get my skeptics radar up. I hear them all the time, but I'm finding myself kind of buying into those claims. This is a unique novel. It's been a long time since I've read one with this kind of, I don't know, there's an energy to it. Main character's a young man named Cyrus Shams, son of Iranian immigrants to the American Midwest. Cyrus has had trouble with alcohol. He's struggling to remain sober. He's an addict and a poet, and he's obsessed with martyrs of Islamic legends in particular, but martyrs in general, so no matter what the tradition. He's a real mix of grand and mundane. He's got this contemporary North American cultural allusions that come in all the time, and they disrupt these kind of grand Persian memories, or the cultural references at least that he has. His first name, Cyrus, one of the greatest of Persian kings, but then his last name, Shams, undercuts everything, and that's kind of him. He spends his life seeking meaning and faith in art and the grand, like lots of young men. There's lots of stories like this, but at the same time, he's quite ordinary, and he's struggling with that. It's very familiar, it's very resonant, but yeah, I would use the word energy. It just pulled me along.
Kaveh Akbar, a name to add to my own reading list. And I know people are listening over the radio, so they can't see this, but you have the book here in the studio, and it is a stack of books that you have, which is just so thrilling. Another resolution, perhaps, for 2024.
It is my New Year's resolution,
to bring the books along. So we're going to put that Martyr title aside, and from Martyrs to Goddesses in the next selection. And this work building on a previously recommended novel.
It is, yes. This one is called Divine Might, Goddesses in Greek Myth. It's by Natalie Haynes, and Natalie Haynes must be one of my favorite authors, judging by how excited I was to find that there was a new book coming from her. You might recall a couple of years ago I spoke about her book Pandora's Jar.
Still thinking about that title. Great
isn't
title.
it? Yeah. And it argued that in the original Greek myths, female characters were treated much more sympathetically than they are now, and that, in fact, the history of Western art and ideas, the male side was elevated and the stories were simplified. They were far more complex back when the playwrights of ancient Greece were dealing with them. So Divine Might is a continuation of that desire to, in her words, rehabilitate the reputation of the female characters from those ancient stories. So here she looks at Athena, Aphrodite, Hera, Demeter, and the Muses, among others. She's not always successful making us totally sympathetic to these characters, but that's not really the point. The point is that they were more complex. They were a mix of good and bad, just like so many of us, speaking for myself. And that's actually where the power of the stories were, is that combination. So the star of the show, I think, as always with Haynes, is her. She's got such a charm and a wit. I believe she's a stand-up comedian in her time off, and so she's just such a great guide through these stories. Even if you, whether she convinces you or not, you love hearing what she has to say.
Sounds like a really refreshing take on some pretty legendary figures
it
who
is.
appeared
It's really interesting.
throughout the millennia. The subjects discussed in this next suggestion appear in mythology, but they also appear here in Winnipeg.
It's true. That's true. That's what caught my eye. It's called The Age of Deer, Trouble and Kinship with Our Wild Neighbors, and it's by an author named Erica Hauser. And you've realized by now I enjoy books that take some unfamiliar ideas into my familiar parts of the world that I know. And so when I saw a book examining deer, as you say, such a familiar sight in our city and beyond, I just had to take a look. So deer have been an important part of the world. They're one of the only large animals that can thrive in our presence. Huh. And our relationship with them, though, is full of contradictions. We hunt them and protect them. We cull them from the suburbs, but we raise them as icons of the wilderness. We see them as victims, but also as pests. So in this book, Hauser examines the science as well as the mythology of our relationships with these animals. It's part nature writing, part cultural studies. And it reveals that some of the contradictions of our relationship with deer are also found in our ideas of nature as a whole. And very interesting book.
I can honestly say I have never considered deer, Chris. I think, if anything, they're very fleeting considerations, something along the lines of, oh, look, it's a deer. And then I sort of move on. So what a fascinating look. You've got one last suggestion for us, a light, easy read, perhaps, Chris, to close things out?
Yes. Typical Chris Hull pick, I believe, is what some people would say. It's called The Waltz of Reason, The Entanglement of Mathematics and Philosophy by Carl Sigmund. And what would a January what to read session be without a math book, Simon? I just wouldn't be comfortable with that one. So here we go. In case I haven't earned your trust, I'm not taking you into a tangle of mathematical equations, and there are no exams. I'll read from the opening line of the book. Mathematics and philosophy have dated for ages. This book describes in a not too serious vein some of their most memorable encounters, and he later describes his book as a sightseeing tour. So this is my kind of math book. It's really fascinating, the ideas, the histories, the connections, but not a lot of labor with equations. A fascinating look at how our understanding of concepts like morality, like fairness, logic, even the social contract are underpinned by the ideas of mathematics. And we've kind of forgotten that, and we don't know that. And I think the more we know about that, the more we understand some of our underlying assumptions of our world. So if you want to examine that, here's your chance. Here's my New Year's resolution. It's everyone wants to raise their physical fitness. I'm a big believer in mental fitness. I love reading a book that makes me focus and really kind of challenges me. And I just feel like I make better decisions and I'm more mentally alert, pushing myself a little bit. So
it sounds like the Waltz of Reason can help with that.
I believe it can.
as any of the suggestions can. Chris, as always, it's just so wonderful to have you here. So wonderful to welcome you alongside the books back to the studio, and can't wait for 2024 and what it brings to you and McNally. So thanks so much for joining us.
Thank you, Simon.
You can find Chris's picks at McNally Robinson in person at Grant Park Mall, or at the Forks, second floor, or online at McNallyRobinson.com, all sorts of places to go. And of course, we will have the January What to Read feature up on our website, Classic107.com soon.